My name is Caitlin McConnell, and I am here today with Krissy Sinor, an advocate for death positivity. The date is March 26, 2024, and we are visiting at the Library Center in Springfield. This oral history is part of a collaboration between Ozarks Alive and Missouri State University Libraries. Thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
So, just to kind of kick things off, I guess in kind of a broad way, can you kind of tell me how you got interested in, I guess, death positivity, or however you would describe it to begin with?
That's a great question. And I hate to use the word morbid, but I've always been kind of fascinated by death rituals and the different ways that people handle death. And it wasn't really a broad cultural thing. It was just like, in my own family or my husband's family, or just the people around me, and it kind of just grew from there. That this was something that I was interested in, and then I was very much interested in hospice care, and worked very closely with hospices for a couple of years in a nonprofit to get people to understand what hospice was and what hospice meant, how important it can be. When you're making end-of-life decisions, to consider hospice as part of that decision. And so it just kind of grew from there. And then back in, I believe it was 2015 or 2016 when the library did its first death and dying programming, they asked staff who was interested, and of course my hand went up immediately. And from there it's just kind of snowballed. So going from someone who just had I don't want to say a hidden, but certainly not a broadcast interest in death and dying, to someone who will talk about it at the drop of a hat if you would like for me to, because that's what needs to happen.
When the library began that series, just generally, what do you remember? I mean, was there a hunger for that sort of information, or was it trying to bring people along to discuss those things?
It was a little bit of both. It was a little bit of both. That very first one we did in 2016, and we had grand plans. We actually brought in 4 national authors for that particular one, and in future subsequent years we had fewer national people come in, but there was one person who was, her name is Caitlin Doty, and she is kind of they call her the Queen Mother of the death positivity movement. We were able to get her.
Wow.
And we had her 2 or 3 times actually, so we were able to get her on more than one occasion. And but the other people that we had was a doctor who wrote a book about end-of-life conversations and how important they were. Another was a mortician. His name is Thomas Lynch, and he actually had a PBS documentary called The Undertaking, based on a book that he wrote. And he does write books, and he also writes poetry. And so he came from Michigan. And then we had Ross Chast, who is a cartoonist for the New Yorker, who does a lot of death positivity things.
So, one thing I think about is with people having control, and sometimes that makes them less anxious about things. And so with regards to death and dying, when people understand their options, they may not have to be embalmed. They can choose other things. Can you talk a little bit about how that impacts their attitudes towards talking about death, if it does? And then kind of also, again, like what is death positivity in this space?
I do think it impacts the way that they approach their own death and dying process, because if you have options, like somebody like me, I really don't want to be embalmed. I don't mind being buried, but I don't really want to be preserved. It's to me that's not what I want. It is possible. It is possible for me to die. I could die tomorrow. I can still be buried without being embalmed. There is no law in any state in the United States that says that you have to be embalmed in order to be buried. The only caveat that will probably exist is a time frame. So you have to remain refrigerated, and they have to get you in the ground pretty quickly, but you don't have to be embalmed. So knowing that, if I can't do a more what I consider a natural burial, I will be happy to be buried without being embalmed. And so I can go with that. So with death positivity, it really does, like I said earlier, make a safe space. You open those doors and say, okay, this is where we can talk about this. And there's no judgment, there's no steering people towards a certain way or a certain thing. We're here to be educated. We're here to share stories or share experiences. We want to make sure that we can access the information that we want to access about what can happen to us or what will happen to us once we die. And not in a spiritual way, that's a whole nother conversation, but what happens to our body, and how do we want that to look, and who do we want to be involved, and do those people want to be involved? Do they want to help make those decisions for us?
Well, I want to come back to what you would suggest in terms of those conversations and a plan in just a second, but like going back to the point about you don't have to be embalmed.
Right.
I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's kind of one major tenet in the concept of a green burial. Tell me what else is involved in that, and kind of how you've seen that evolve since you've been learning more about this.
Right. We talk a lot about green burial, but green burial is honestly how it used to be. We've come a long way. They really started with embalming back in the Civil War. That's when it really started to be a thing that was done a lot, because so many of the soldiers were so far from home. Their mamas wanted them home. Their families wanted their bodies back home. They wanted to be able to give them a service and bury them. And of course, you can't put decaying bodies on trains and send them, 4 or 5 or however many days away. So that when it became really in vogue, and one of the reasons that funeral homes used to be called funeral parlors is because people used to put their loved ones, their deceased loved ones, in their parlors for visitations and things until it was time for the funeral. And of course, they weren't embalmed then either. So the looking at green burials, there's no embalming, there's no chemicals of any kind. The receptacle that you are buried in, if it's actually something made of wood, it has to be untreated wood. It has to be something that's going to go back to the earth. So it can't be treated wood, it can't be metal, it can't be things that won't rot or decompose. If you have someone who is going to just be buried like in a shroud or in a cloth, it needs to be 100% cotton, so it will decompose. And that's what a lot of people really look at with natural burials. Some people consider a natural burial just not being embalmed. And that's okay too, because everybody's idea of a green burial can also be different. That's where those choices come in. But a lot of it is like no chemicals. Some people say, well, being cremated is a natural burial, but being cremated also creates a lot of pollution. There's a lot of energy used for cremating a body, and there's the thing about cremation is it doesn't take up as much space. So that's one of the things that people who are for green burials are for other more natural ways to dispose of human remains. Cemeteries take up a lot of space. Cemeteries take up a lot of space, and they will continue to. America is one country that does not disinter its dead. There are countries in Europe that do. They're a lot smaller, and so basically when a person dies, you're really only renting that space. And so after 10 years or 20 years, however long it takes, for those remains to just be bones, that's how long. And they will go and remove those remains and give them to the family if there's any family left. And that space is then for somebody else. So I know.
It's an interesting cultural difference that and I guess that's a reminder that we can all feel comfortable with different things just depending on what the culture is around us.
There are huge cultural differences in how people approach death and dying around the world.
Do you get the sense that, I think about what I've read about even the Ozarks in the 20s, 30s, 40s, it was at home, it was something that was visible, and yet it feels like it's something that while no one wants to die in most cases. Like, it's a scary, distasteful thing to generally think about now.
Absolutely. It's still like that. It's not, I don't think it's as much as it was before. And a lot of times, especially with cremation, you instead of having a funeral, you're having a celebration of life. Or instead of a funeral, you're having a memorial service where the body isn't even there. And so there's a lot to be said for, yes, let's be more open and honest about this, but also remember, the reason that we're here is to get my favorite author, Thomas Lynch. He's the one that wrote. He said our job is to get them to where they need to be. But that's both the deceased and their family. And he's a funeral director. He's like, well, he was second or third generation, and his sons and probably his grandsons are going to be carrying it on too, once they're old enough. But it's getting people to where they need to be, and in whatever way works best for them and for their families. I'm not anti-funeral home at all. I'm really not anti anything. I think people should have choices, and the time to present those choices to people isn't when their loved one just died, because that's a horrible time for people who are just in the very, very first stages of grief to try to make those decisions.
Well, I guess to your point too, if someone did want more green option, it has to happen quickly.
Pretty quickly, yes. There's more and more green options available now. There's some that are, people think that's kind of out there, but they can't. There's all different kinds of things, and I just actually posted on our Death Chat Facebook page yesterday or the day before is human composting, and people go, oh my gosh, that's just the most disgusting thing ever. It's really not. It's actually beautiful. And the one that I saw, it was actually on CBS this morning.
Really?
I don't know if it was last week or the week before, but it's on. I linked it on the page. But it's magnificent, and the family can be there and be a part of it. And the way that these machines work is that they can reduce a human body to usable compost within 4 to 6 weeks with no chemicals.
Wow. Well, and thinking about the practicalities of something like that, or even any of these green options, like, it's one thing to think, okay, yeah, I want to be buried in a shroud. It's another thing to tell my family members, you take my deceased body and figure out how to get a hole dug and put it in there with
and just yeet me into a hole. Yeah.
Are there are you seeing navigators or funeral homes around here locally that there's more of a business for helping in those situations?
There are a couple of funeral homes, and I won't name names because they change their practices a lot, and they do try to keep up with times. And but the best thing to do, like anything that you're purchasing, is be a good consumer and understand what you want and go out there and find out what's available. Because it is possible to be buried in a shroud. You don't have to have a casket, but the funeral home you're working with might require that you're in a cardboard casket, and those are biodegradable. You can get wicker caskets that are biodegradable, but if you're going to an actual green burial ground, you have a lot of different options. But again, there's not one around here. I'd love to build one if I ever won the lottery. I might be interested in doing that, but some of the funeral homes here and the cemeteries here in the Springfield, Southwest Missouri area will offer green burials to a certain extent. So you just have to do your homework and find out.
So even thinking a step further, I mean, like you said, people don't have to be embalmed, but it does come back to the local cemetery association, I guess. Like, do you need a vault? Do they allow you to just dig a hole? And I'm assuming, that makes things another layer to check into if somebody's interested. But like, if they're hypothetically like in a place that, doesn't have a cemetery nearby where they would let them do that. Can you just like go dig a hole on your farm and do it, or are there rules around like what's now a cemetery?
There are
like
rules against that.
Okay.
And everybody needs to check in their own locality, because I realize this might be might be going to Arkansas as well. So you're encompassing the Ozarks, but there are places where that can happen. Now, on my property, I have a whole 9 acres. It's not going to happen there. But if there is a precedent there, if your family already has a cemetery there, if there's already a cemetery on the premises, even if there's only 3 or 4 headstones and they're all 100 years old, there's still a precedent for that. But they need to check into that. There have been legal cases of somebody burying their loved one in the back 40. They have a death certificate, so everything is okay, but burying them in the back 40 without a permit. Cemeteries have permits. They're permitted to be cemeteries, so they really need to check into that, which is why I think some people just pick the cremation option, and then what they choose to do with the remains, as long as they don't advertise it everywhere, then they do whatever they want to with the remains.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's, I guess in that way, we're going down some rabbit holes here, but maybe it's easier to find a tiny cemetery that is older if it's, because it's grandfathered in a different way. And
in a lot of places they can be, yes.
Okay. You mentioned like the compost idea. I've heard about the diamond and become a tree, and if somebody wanted to pursue one of those, and again, not naming specifics, but are there providers locally who can help with that, or is this like you need to find someone on the internet who you somehow ship your body to and it happens elsewhere?
Shipping the body is probably going to be a little bit more than most people are going to want to do. It's really expensive, and you have to have permits, especially if it's going over state lines and things like that. Like I said, here locally, as far as green burials go, I don't know anyone that does the, making people into a tree, because they're burial pods. They're very cool, but I don't know anybody locally who does that. As far as the, and I have it on the tip of my tongue, but it's not, it's like hydrolyzation or something, where it uses water in some way to reduce the body, and it looks like cremains, like they were incinerated, but that's not what it is. I'm thinking someone up in Kansas City is trying to do that now. And I don't think human composting is yet legal in Missouri, but somebody's working on that as well to make that happen. So if you're shipping within state lines, I think it's within the state, I think it's doable. It's going to cost you a little bit more, but it's absolutely doable. And as far as green burials go, it just depends on the cemetery and the funeral home.
You mentioned a couple minutes ago about the Death Cafe that you hosted. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and what role it plays in conversations? Sure,
absolutely. Death Cafe was actually started, and I don't have the year, but it was started over in England as a way for people to get together and talk about death, and talk about death-related things, and just to start that conversation and keep it going. They call it Death Cafe because they would meet in a cafe somewhere, maybe have some tea, maybe have some cake, and just talk about things that are related to death and dying. And it kind of expanded from there, and there's death cafes literally all over the world now. We started the Death Cafe back in 2016. That was tied into the programming, the death and dying programming that we're doing here at the library. But most of us who were involved in that are no longer with the library, and we didn't want to keep it tied to the library, so that's why it was separated a little bit. And then after the pandemic, well, actually it happened a little bit before the pandemic, and then we've had 1 or 2 meetings since then, and the death cafes ask that if you use their name, that you follow some fairly, I don't want to say strict, but very firm guidelines about how you conduct the cafes, and what kinds of things are brought up and what kinds of things are shared. And for us as librarians, it was a little bit too stringent. And the only reason I say that is because as librarians, we like to share information. And so I put that on, I think it was last year, and I said, hey guys, this is what I would like to do. And that's why we changed the name to Death Chat, just because We wanted to be able to put things on that say, hey, take a look at this. This is interesting, and that's what I do when I see something that's interesting. And if I read it in the newspaper or if I see it on CBS this morning, it's something that I can share with people and say, this is another aspect of this, and what do you think about that? And what do you think about this? Because when we get together and talk, Death Cafe is very much about, we have no agenda, we're just here to talk about things that have to do with death. And I feel the same way, but I also want to be able to share extra information with people that they may not see. There was a really interesting one about assisted, it's called medical assistance in dying. People call it assisted suicide, but they're trying to change that a little bit. But there was a really interesting article about a person up in New England somewhere, and so I shared that as well. It's like, here's something you may not have seen, something else something you may want to consider. And we put trigger warnings on it and everything, but it's just to give people an idea. And I'd like to start doing some in-person ones again. We're just all so busy, and
that was my next question too. Is it what form it existed in now? Is it mainly the Facebook group?
It's just on the Facebook group right now. Every once in a while somebody will share, and so I'm hoping, we always say when life calmed down a little bit, but it's never calming down. So, but I'd really like to be able to start them up again and just have people get together when they want to, and especially since the pandemic, so many people have experienced a different path now with the pandemic, and people not able to go to funerals. Gosh, people not able to have funerals. And so it's a different thing, and I think you might get a new, just this whole new influx of opinions and people sharing their experiences, and it can't be a bad thing.
The pandemic is something I've wondered about too, given that you mentioned that. I'll tangent off here for a second. But that, how did that in the long term change our attitude in a different way towards funerals specifically? Like you said, people for a number of years really didn't have them or had them in a different way, or they were virtual. And what role do funerals play in that closure? Not for everybody. I know there's different feelings towards them, but there's a reason they've existed for so long, and I think that for a lot of people they do offer at least a point where it's like, okay, we're going to come together and mark this moment and more, and start that, be part of that process. And it is more like, okay, in a few months we might have a celebration of life, or we might, I just wonder in the future we'll look back and think that was kind of a watershed moment for a different approach. And is that a bad thing or a good thing, or does it matter?
Very possibly. And I don't know either way. Some people look at funerals as their duty. This is what we're supposed to do. Other people look at it like, I just need to get through this so that I can get to the next thing, which is actually grieving, because you see a lot of people. My mother is an example. When my dad died, and she doesn't remember hardly anything, of the actual service. She does remember, being there and everything. But as far as what was said and that kind of thing, she just feels like she was really in a fog, and that her grieving started, her grieving had started before he passed away because he had been ill. But, her true grieving didn't really start until after the funeral was over. So it means different things to different people. But I would imagine that that things have changed since the pandemic, at least for some people, and that it either became less important or it became even more important to see to that ritual and to make sure that thing happened, either for the family or for the friends, or just because that's the way we've always done it.
Jumping back for just a second to when you all were still with the Death Cafe, was there ever any discussion or crossover with the groups in other parts of the world, or were you kind of siloed in what
we were just kind of siloed in with what we were doing? They have a website, deathcafe.com, and it comes out of England, and they also have surveys and things like that they want you to hand out to people afterwards, after you do the Death Cafe, which is fine, but it's just a little bit more work. But we were never really talking about it that much. But it's amazing the groups of people that got brought together through our death and dying programming, especially the first and the second year, because that first year we had Ross Chest, I mentioned her, a cartoonist for the New Yorker, but she's a cartoon. She does all kinds of drawings. She doesn't just do it about death. She does all kinds. So we had a lot of people come to see her who had no interest in the death and dying part, but then once they were here, they went, oh, this is kind of interesting. Maybe I'll stay for something else. Conversely, with Caitlin Doty, I mean, she's a rock star in the death positivity movement, and we had people come from Wisconsin to drive down here and see her. Because she was at a library and it was free, you know, and nobody, you know, we just have to get there and then we can get in, you know. I mean, we filled up. We had to go somewhere else because we couldn't fit people in here, you know. And it was fantastic because people really opened their eyes. And I've had people just out of the blue say, "Do you know?" You probably think this is weird, but do you know a lady named Caitlin Doty? And I'm like, I've read all her books, you know. But it's nice when people can open up about it and talk about it. And not that we force people to. Again, it's a choice, but we want people to know that you can talk about it. It's great. You can talk about it.
Well, the reason I wondered about you know, the cultural crossover, and I think it hopefully still an okay question anyway, is that like, are the topics and questions in the Ozarks similar to what the rest of the world is talking about, or are we kind of like, did you see any contrast in anything that you had read or heard about?
Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. And I can't say the rest of the world really. I have some familiarity with things that happen in Europe as far as, you know, some different countries and the way they do things. But in the United States, I mean, I think there's some regional differences. I know that in the Ozarks especially, I'm originally from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I can tell you with my family, visiting the graves wasn't a thing. We didn't do that. Now I did a little bit on my own, but not, you know, for Memorial Day or for major holidays and things like that. And when I moved to the Ozarks, that is a thing. That is what we do. And not just on Veterans Day and not just on Memorial Day and those days when you go put a flag out. It's all the time. And that's okay and that's great. It's something that I've embraced myself, and it's something that really means a lot to me. But with so many people being cremated, especially in my family, it's like there's nowhere to go. But I know that it's not the same way everywhere. You know, that it's not, you know, I have you know, of 4 grandparents, I have one that's actually buried somewhere. The rest are all cremated. One. You know, and for somebody who likes genealogy and doing family tree stuff, it makes it a little bit difficult sometimes. You know, but because you lose those links and you lose those trains and you have to find them somewhere else. I know in some bigger cities, especially when they were having so much trouble, you know, they had so many dead from the pandemic, you know, and they were just working as fast as they possibly could, you know, and it was just so difficult for them to serve the families the way they wanted to serve the families. And so
well, and that's, you know, the point about where do you go. I think about that a lot in my rural reporting, that I see, you know, cemeteries that on varying degrees are still maintained to ones that aren't at all. And I think those are the things that in 50 years I worry about, you know, whether any of them will be maintained or accessible in the way they are now, because they are still being used now, but as there are fewer and fewer burials and as people move away from the places maybe generationally they've been, what's the future of those as resources? So it's, you know, we'll just have to wait and see, I guess, on that. But
exactly,
you know, one of the last things I'll ask, and if there's other things we want to talk about, that's great, but talking about resources, like what if somebody wants to have a conversation or start thinking about things in line with that, you know, death positivity mindset, you know, are there kind of a standard list of things you tell them that they probably should consider or think about, or are there, you know, good resources out online or in via the library or wherever?
Sure,
they
there's
should
great
go to?
resources in the library, and you
Okay.
can ask any of the librarians here. Just tell them you're interested in death and dying resources. They have some great books here, some of them from the people I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But there's great books. There are documentaries out there. Trigger warnings on all of them. People die. So, but there's all different kinds of documentaries that are available, and there's also different websites. You can go to our Death Chat page and it's just called Death Chat of the Ozarks on Facebook. But you can go, if you do a Google search, you can go to funerals.org. You can go ask about green burials. There are tons of books out there about green burials. And then the Funeral Association of Missouri, not Funeral Directors Association, but a Funeral Association. There's some nonprofits out there that are talking a lot about, and I'll get those to you later
That'd be great.
if you'd like that. But there's different places you can go to get more information about what's available and what you can ask about, what you can ask your funeral director about. If there's a funeral home that you have in mind, or for your family or for yourself, then ask them what they offer. It's like, what do you offer, and how can we get from here to where I want to be? I don't want to be embalmed. I'd rather not have a big metal casket. I'd rather have something. That's another thing a lot of people don't know. You don't have to buy your casket or whatever receptacle you're buried in from the funeral home that's doing your service. You don't. You can actually buy a casket from Costco, from Sam's, and you can buy that wicker basket. You can buy those online. And I just saw something the other day. There's a gentleman in the Ozarks who's just making coffins at home because he can. Did you see that?
And actually, I was going to mention that because that's one of the interviews I don't know if it's the same person, but that's one of the interviews I've done for this project. Is there's a gentleman down in Stone County.
That's him.
Yes.
Yep, that's him.
Yep. He, Larry Sifford, and if anybody's listening to this wants to listen to that interview as well, it should be available to listen as well. But he began making them several years ago, and there's a huge demand for these,
There is a huge demand for them because people just want plain. People just, they don't need anything fancy. Not everybody. And that's, again, it's a choice. It's a personal decision that you should be able to make on your own without, other people saying, oh, don't do it that way or don't do it that way. I think a lot of it, and it is the funeral industry, but it's like any other industry. In a free market economy, that's what we have. It is about profit, and I understand that. But we have tied in that, well, if you don't buy daddy the very best, then you didn't love him enough. Or my daddy was such and such, and he deserves the very best, which could cost me $20,000 or $30,000 that I don't have. But it's the idea that more money means more respect, or it's a better way to bury someone is not necessarily true. And again, it's a personal decision. And my dad threatened me with a lot of bad things if we spent that much money on the funeral. So he pre-planned too, so that helped. That always helps.
Well, and I guess one more thing off of that, once you make these decisions, is there a best practice for how many copies do you need? Do you put them in certain places? Are there, have a folder with everything in it?
Here's the thing, because a lot of people will put that in an advance directive or a living will, and they'll put it in their will, which is way too late. Wills are not read until after the funeral's over and everything else. So yes, have several copies. And if you have an advance directive, which I recommend, if you have an advance directive, then your final arrangement you should copy it to that as well.
Interject one thing there. For someone's listening to this and does not know what an advance directive is, can you define that?
Sure. An advance directive gives you the opportunity to name someone as your power of attorney for healthcare decisions. Healthcare decisions only. Power of attorney for your finances is a separate thing. So in case you get to a point where you were incapable of making decisions because your health is deteriorated so badly, then this person is the one who's going to make decisions for you. And the advanced care directives, you can actually probably download one from the library, not from the library's website, but you can print one off at the library. there's all different kinds of advance directives out there. The local hospitals use what's called respecting choices, which was another thing that was part of our death and dying series for a while. But they have advance directives that they'll just give you a copy of one. You can ask your doctor. They have them at the doctor's offices. But it also helps with pre-planning, because you get to help make the decisions about at what point can you no longer make those decisions for yourself, and what decisions you want them to consider for you if they're your power of attorney.
Thank you for that
Sure.
introduction. And so once you have that, that's part of the folder.
That's
that you're
that's
gonna
part of
create.
the folder, yeah.
Okay.
And I would make sure. I mean, if you're married, obviously your spouse needs it. Your spouse does not have to be your power of attorney for advanced, for medical decisions. It's the person you feel like will follow your wishes. And it may or may not be your spouse. It may or may not be an adult child. It could be your best friend. It could be your neighbor. It can be anybody you choose. But yes, that information needs to be given to that person, and then anybody who would have a say in how you're going to be buried or how your body is going to be disposed of at your end of life needs a copy of what you want. And especially if you've done pre-planning and any money has changed hands with the funeral director or a crematory or anything like that, they need copies of all of that, so they can just look and go, oh, mom's already done this. This is what's going to happen. And if they can see it and say, mom would like to be, I don't want to be buried in a casket. I want to be buried in grandma's quilt. And so that thing happens.
And I would guess, from what you're saying and what I've heard others talk about too, that brings comfort to the loved ones left behind, because they don't have to wonder if they made the right decision.
They don't have to wonder if they made the right decision, and they can feel very happy that they did what mom wanted, that they did what mom asked them to do. And that can bring a lot of peace to people. I know it will to me, if I'm the one that makes those final arrangements for my mother, that I know I did what she wanted me to do. And it's important.
This has been wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to add or talk about before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. I could go on and on for a long time, but I'll share some resources with you.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for your time. This has
Sure.
been fantastic.
Absolutely.